This is Bob Jornlin, native of rural Earlville, and he's had an interesting life and career. First, we'll get around to the basics. Bob, where were you born and what were your parents' name?
I was born in Ottawa, but my parents lived south of Leland, just off of the gravel road that they nicknamed Easy Street.
Okay.
South of 34, about a mile and an eighth, and then east towards the little Indian Creek. And,
okay.
I lived on Roy Anderson's farm, who was a brother to Tommy Anderson, the attorney here in town.
Correct.
Quite a bit of difference in the two brothers. And I was quite young then, so all I'm basing that on is my dad. Dad,
That was Morris?
yeah, Morris Jornlin, and my mother was Viola Jornlin. She was, her maiden name was Opie, O-P-I-E. And she come from LaSalle. She was born in Mineral Point, Wisconsin. And her ancestors, I think her dad probably came over from some part of England, and they went to mine the lead there. Is how they got over there.
Mm-hmm.
But they moved back to LaSalle at some point, somewhere around 15, I think she was, when they moved to LaSalle. And her brother worked at Westclocks for 35, 40 years. And,
A lot of people did.
yep. Dad was born in Brookings, South Dakota. And he had 3 brothers. And his dad was one of 11 siblings. 2 were girls, I know, and 2 died somewhere young or at birth. But he was number 10, and in 1998 they had a 100-year anniversary type reunion up in Gatsky, Thief River Falls, Minnesota. And
Is that right by the border then?
yeah, it's
South
very
Dakota.
very close to the Canadian line. I suppose 30 miles or maybe 40.
Okay.
Not sure. But
Were they farmers up there too?
yes. My grandfather went up there in around 1915, I think. And Dad was born in 1910. And he'd met my grandmother, who was a glover here.
Okay.
And she went out to visit relatives, but she ended up getting a job teaching school there. And anyway, she met my grandfather, who was named Walter. And there wasn't a lot going on in Brookings in South Dakota at that point. And they had a chance to go to Montana. They're up by Havre, Montana, which again is pretty close to the Canadian line.
Yeah.
And they could homestead 320 acres, and the rancher was going to give them $1 an acre when they proved it up, which took 2 years. He went up there when he was 29, and he got typhoid fever the first year and died at 30. So my grandmother came back to Earlville, and she lived in the house, if you go by the fire
What
station.
year would that have been about? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, she came back in 28 maybe. She went up there in 1905, and then 1914 they went to Havre. No, excuse me, 1914 is when he died.
It's close to Glacier National Park, isn't it?
I think it's east of there.
Mm-hmm.
She moved back here in 1919 with the 4 boys, and she took in washings and cleaned houses. And,
Boy,
pretty much, yeah. She sold the horses, a pair of horses, and I think a cow or something, and she sold that to get enough money for train fare back. But then I was thinking of when she got killed, she walked out in front of a train. She lived right across from the fire station at today's first house on the east side of the road there. And she was the miserable day in December, and she had her head down. She was with another lady, but it was sleeting or something, and the first train went by, and then she just walked out, and the second train hit her. So Dad lost both of his parents at a fairly young age. She it was 1919 when she got killed, and well, they came back to Earlville in 1919. I'm pretty sure Dad graduated in 1930 from high school. He was actually was the janitor at the high school.
And student also.
In senior year. And the high school was pretty new. I think it was built somewhere like 1919 or 1918. They lived with
well, I guess
yeah,
I can pass over that.
Yeah, south of town here, and I know the name, but I can't think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't remember anything actually.
So then what did he do after high school?
He took some training in mechanics, and he worked out the Ford garage in LaSalle. And he didn't start farming until 37. And that's where he met Mother. I was in LaSalle at a dance or something, which they had a lot of dances in. They had a son who they named Morris Jornlin Jr., and everybody called him Duke. They had another boy in between us, but he was born dead. So it was 6 years between myself and my brother.
Right.
And, which was kind of a detriment for most of my life.
Being the younger brother?
Yeah, I had a sister 2 years younger than me, then born. And,
Shirley.
Shirley. But I was always too young to be with brother, and somewhere down the line, I got very close to my dad, basically, and we did everything together. In fact, when I was young, even if I got in trouble, I would climb a tree and go off the cob house roof and over the fence and go out in the field where Dad was for
Safety measures.
for safety. One of those times, I was on the corn planter, and I got up on the corn planter, and it was an F-20, and I stepped on the power takeoff, and it caught me and wrapped me up in the power takeoff.
Oh my word.
But the F-20 was pretty new, and he had it tuned up well, and it was just sitting there, tickety, 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 tick. Slip clutch slipped twice, and 2 clicks, and it killed the tractor.
Wow. You might not be here if that hadn't happened.
Well, he said it was the only time the slip clutch has ever slipped that he ever knew about.
Wow.
And along about that time, shortly after that, I reached up on the cook stove, which Mother was boiling some hot water, and dumped a pan of hot water over the top of my head. So I kind of was a tough child to bring up.
Yeah, some kids got killed that way. I remember.
Yeah,
One in our
I've
family
used up a
did.
lot of lives, and because I'll tell you as I go along here. But, I went to one-room school. It was a Bill Passel school. It was a 3/4 of a mile south of us. It was just a dirt road from our farm, from Roy Anderson's farm down there. And when it rained, we had to walk because our bikes would pick up mud and clogged into the fenders, and many times brother had to ride my bike home because I couldn't pedal it, but he could.
Yeah, make the wheels tight.
I went there through just about through second grade, and that was 1947, and the electricity came down Easy Street, and Easy Street was named because there was a lot of 80 acres and some 40-acre farms on it, so everybody nicknamed it Easy Street. My mother belonged to the Easy Street Society, which had 55 members at one point. And she stayed a member clear up until about 1997 or 8.
Really?
And it got down to be only 3 or 4 members, and most of them couldn't drive anymore. And they would get together a couple of times a year at that point and go out and eat. But even that got to be too much, because they had it at their houses for a while, then they just went to eat in a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought there should have been a story done on that
Right.
society, basically,
Yeah.
because there was a lot of people belonging.
It's interesting.
But anyway, electricity was coming down Easy Street, and Roy Anderson would not bring it up that quarter of a mile and into the farm. He said it cost too much money. So Mother said, she was about had it with trying to wash clothes with a Briggs and Stratton engine, I believe, on a washing machine that didn't hardly start or run. And I went through that was kind of the Depression, and I remember we pumped water with a one-cylinder engine, and I even got to start that a few times. I was pretty young, but I was warned by Dad to make sure I didn't have my thumb around the handle as it kicked. So I didn't like to start it, but I did. And, we had outside plumbing, and it was a 2-story house over there, big house. In fact, it was owned by the Pierce family. And the Pierce family got a grant from the King of England, I believe, at some point. And he owned that ground all the way to Sheridan from there at one time. But there was a cemetery out in the timber, and they were all buried out there.
Mm-hmm.
They say they've all been moved, but I doubt it. I don't
I
believe,
just covered over.
I don't believe that. There was stones on it, but I haven't been back, of course, for a long time back there. And there's a house built now back not too far from it, so I can't exactly walk in there and explore it without at least getting permission. But we had a big room up above. We had 2 stairways in that house, and but it seemed like the main room upstairs was quite big. And then off of that was about another 6 bedrooms almost. I think we had chickens in one of them one time for a while, and did different things. Then we had a stairway up to the attic, and we were told that old man Pierce buried everybody in the family when they died, but there was nobody to bury him, so he went up in the attic and died. But when it got
It's a good Halloween story.
when it got stormy at night, he would come down and want to play checkers or cards. So brother and I were up there in that big room. We hated to have it, lightning and storms go on. Moved over to Earlville in 1947.
Set out in 34 there?
Yeah, on Route 34. It was Mrs. Jenks. I don't remember her first name, but she owned the farm. She had a daughter that had been to the University of Illinois and taken animal science, and she knew all the answers. So they were hard people, but father got along with them very well. It was 50-50 on the livestock, which he didn't particularly like. But he milked cows at that time, about 10 or 12 cows, and they had hogs and chickens. I don't think the chickens come under that, but the hogs and the cattle do. We used to have to run them across Route 34. The land was on both sides. And 34 was like Interstate 80 in those days. there wasn't any Interstate 80.
A lot of truck traffic.
A lot of truck traffic out of Missouri and Iowa going to the stockyards. But you know, back then when all we had was a flashlight with an orange cone on it, a 6-inch orange cone. And we'd get out there and get in the middle of the Route 34 and wave that thing, and those truckers would come to a stop. Sometimes they'd get out and help us get this cattle across. Cattle, you had to put the straw down the first couple of times because they wouldn't want to see
Concrete, yeah.
So I had 1.25 miles to go to school, head to the boat school. But one thing about the boat school, it had indoor plumbing. That was the greatest thing that ever was invented, I thought. Where we lived on 34 still had outside bathroom. It did have water in the house. It had a bathtub in the basement. But there was no bathroom.
That built character in young men.
I built something, I don't know what. I built something. It was a great farm, and Dad.
How many acres was that?
I think it was about 320 in there.
Oh, that's
Maybe
good
a little
size.
more than that. Dad had 320 over to Leland. Some of it was timber, but he had a hired man most of the time. In fact, Jack, the milkman, help me out. Myers. Jack Myers was Dad's first hired man. And he was only like 17 or 18. And brother thought that he had come to, Dad had got him to come and play with him.
Oh.
He looked quite young and he was thin and so forth. And when Dad,
Pretty talkative.
when Dad got him on the tractor, then my brother was very unhappy and that he'd taken away his playmate. And Jack liked to talk about coming out and getting me out of the cattle yard with the bull one time. And I don't remember that, but that's his story. We had hired men most of the time, and I know one got paid $7 a week, and we fed him dinner, lunch.
Did he live there too?
No, we did have one that lived for a while in the house. I don't remember his name. Guy Tripp was the one that we hired. That was $7 a week, and he hated to drive the F-20. He wanted to drive the M. And, Dad had one of the first M's that was in the country. It was out of Dixon, and it was a 1939, which they didn't make very many 39 M's. But he likes to tell a story of bringing it home, and he went by the Fuchs family farm there on Easy Street, and they kind of waved him down. He stopped, and he wanted to ride, or he wanted to show it to him, but they got on there, and he put it up in fourth, and then kicked it down in the fifth, and he said they just screamed. They hung on to their hats, and he took them down the road.
I never saw one of those move too fast. But
We had a pony bought for us there for a while, actually a horse, and from Starks, and I don't remember his first
Ollie.
name, but he was over in Montana. And that horse was well trained. It would stop when you fell off, actually, and he could make it bow and a few other things, but we didn't ride it enough, and got to be a hazard. It would eat. Get the door open on the pen in the barn, and got in and messed up all the mineral and feed that we had there in the alleyway.
where'd you go to school when you were living over at Earlville on 34 there?
That was a boat school.
The boat school.
And
You remember who your teacher was out there?
yeah, Marjorie Eckathorn was our teacher for a couple of years, and I don't think she was there the first year. I don't remember that teacher, but that was only a couple of months. We moved in March.
Mm-hmm.
But she went somewhere else for more money or something, and they hired Marge Boltz Heckathorn, but she was just Margie Boltz then, and she probably wasn't more than 19, I would guess. They didn't go to college to teach when we were in school. They gave them a 6-week course or something they went to. And
I've heard that.
but she was a pretty good-looking gal, those days, and probably still is. I know she's still in Leland, I haven't seen her, but she would come out and play softball with us. She'd pitch. And, you know, we didn't have enough people to play with, you know, 9 guys on each team. We had to play move up, and I've explained that to my sons and daughters. And they also, what's move up? Because they always had 20 kids that wanted to play, 25. And,
Yeah, I remember move up.
yeah, you know, you caught the ball, and if you got a fly, you went right to bat. If you just got the guy out, you moved up one place, and you worked your way around the mound, and pitcher, and then catcher, and then you bat it. We had right field was out, and the pitchers, her hands were like first baseman.
Right.
And,
Well, what year were you born? We skipped that all.
I was born in 1939. And,
39, okay.
Yeah, May of 39, and
I wanted to get that established.
yeah.
Keep the years kind of
You know,
progressing.
I went through the war years. All I remember is everything was rationed, and but being a farmer, you had a little advantage on a lot of people. One was gasoline, but I know we didn't have a lot of money. Dad always talked about. Well, first of all, he had 800 acres in the Earlville Bank, National Bank, and it closed up in a depression. And that was after he rented the farm, I think. And so he went down to the Triumph Bank, the $1 million bank in the cornfield, that's what it was called. And they loaned him dollar for dollar on the money he had in the Earlville Bank. They said it would be good. And they said, if you take that and get your crop in, and when you get your crop in, come back, we'll loan you another $800. So that's how Dad got started farming. And all he ever had was another milk cow or another sow. And for a lot of years, he said it just. The other story he likes to tell is he had a team of horses, and they had a thrashing
Yeah.
group. Well, everybody kind of got rid of their horses and got tractors. So Dad and another neighbor was the only 2 guys with horses, and they had to go out and unload their wagons basically by themselves. And these other guys all stood around the thrashing machine and threw the bundles in and off the rack. But you had to get the horses ready to go over, and he was milking cows. And then when you got done working all day, you had to put the horse away and comb them down and feed them and bed them. And so he got with the other guy that had a team of horses, and he said, why don't we buy a combine? And they did. Well, they had the whole neighborhood mad at them there for a while.
Because they weren't around
That was
anymore.
the end of the thrashing
Right, yeah.
team. But you know, like Dad said, when it come time to harvest oats, he said the neighbors started coming around wanting to know if he'd come by their oats too. So that's kind of how that went. We only lived on the farm, on the Jenks farm west of town for about 3 years, 1950. Dad had owned a farm up in north of Hinckley, and he owned it with Doris Richards, 50-50. At that time, and Doris lost his farm out here on Route 34, and so he wanted to go up there and farm that farm. And Dad was against it, and, but anyway, he didn't have a place to go, so we kind of relented and let him go up there. But right away, Doris's wife wanted a new kitchen, and then he wanted a machine shed. And Dad said, hey, he says, I bought this farm to make money on, not to make it nice for you. Said, I'll tell you what, he says, you put a price down on a piece of paper, and if it's too low, I'm going to buy it from you. And if it's the right price, I'm going to sell it to you. You're in my half. Well, I don't know what he put down, but Dad sold it the farm. But with that money, then he bought the Lee Lewis farm, which is where we are now. It's 3.5 miles north of 34 from where we live. And he paid for that farm in 10 years. Of course, it was only like $350 an acre.
How many acres is that?
It was 160.
160, okay.
We fixed up the barn and milk cows, and we had some beef cows, quite a few hogs. And we didn't spend any money on anything. He borrowed money from Llewellyn's in Waterman. And that was like 5% interest. And they didn't want their money back. They wanted to keep it invested, and they pleaded with Dad not to
Pay them off.
just pay the interest, not pay the principal. Build a shed or upgrade the barn or do something like that. Dad said no. He went through the Depression where people lost their farms, so he wanted to get it paid for. And when I went to college in 1957, he rented 80 acres from Art
Eglin?
Papa.
Art
Ray
Yenrick?
Art
Yeah.
Yenrick. And he farmed that for several years. I went to college on it. And Art came down and Dad was combining corn, and he said, I'd like to sell you that 80. And Dad said, well, he didn't quite have the farm paid for it. It must have been before 1960. But he said, I'll talk to you when I get through combining. Well, the guy up and died. Actually, it was in the summer, but Dad never got back to him. So he died, so his wife got life use of the farm. Dad continued to farm it, and we had the oats and beans and corn rotation on the 80, and he didn't change that. He didn't want to confuse her any. He paid all the bills and then went over once a year and settled with her. And then she got to be where she was in the home, and Chuck Mueller married the daughter, Jeannie. So Chuck became the manager of the farm. Basically, all he wanted was the weeds kept down and the roads mowed.
Oh.
Dad said he always wanted it to look like a cemetery, but we did that, and we farmed that farm for 50 years. Now Chuck bought another 80, which we were straightening the creek one day at one time, and it came from the north and went into our creek. We cut 3 acres off of our farm, but he had arrangements with the landlord on the South 80 to pay for what it took just to go through his farm, which was probably 20 rods or maybe 30. He was going to pay for putting the creek right straight all the way right down to the other creek. And, he wanted him to hook that in. Well, the guy farming it told him he shouldn't spend his money up there. He should spend it on the creek going west. So the guy came to Chuck and said, I'm not going to, Chuck was the digger was halfway down through the field and the dredge line, and he said, I don't want to do it. So Chuck said, well, what do you want for that 80? And I believe the guy said 100,000. Chuck took out his checkbook and wrote him out a check. Told Frank Cook, who was running the dredge at that time, just go that way, and when you get to that creek, go west to the road on the big creek. So we gained an 80. So now we're up to 320 acres. And
He liked that figure, didn't he?
yeah.
What he could handle, I guess.
We tried to let the former tenant keep it, but because of what he'd done, Chuck didn't want anything to do with him. And then he liked Dad, and when skip ahead a little bit, when Dad got Parkinson's disease and I took over, we didn't have a problem with that at all. He says that Art's wife had told him that when Chuck had told me that when I took over the farm, all she said was, "You let Jornlin's farm it." That was the only stipulation. So we farmed it for 50 years.
When did you start coming to Earlville to school? Is that school out in 34 and then into Earlville?
Yeah, it was 5th grade. In 5th grade, they consolidated the schools, and we had to come into Earlville, and it was the darkest day of my life because I was going to come in here with these no good city kids.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, they
gave you a hard time too, wouldn't they?
Worthless bunch. Well, they did at first, but I was tough enough. They didn't give me too hard of a time. But it was the best thing that ever happened. Looking back on it, the best thing that ever happened. When I got into town school, actually I coasted through 5th grade because, in grade school, in a one-room school, you got to hear the
upper grades.
Upper grades. And so you couldn't help but absorb something there. And, we also had, adding and subtracting multiple drills on the board against the other kids. You started out and worked your way up as far as you could go until the bigger kids would naturally beat you. But one of the things that came along was basketball. And my dad had played basketball, and I'd always been told this story about he had saved a game, and it was with some school in Aurora, I believe. I took the train then in the wintertime to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But he had drove the length of the floor in about the last seconds and laid a basket in and
Won the game.
So I was always going to be like Dad, and I had a basket up on the old corn crib even back before 1950. And that was outside, and it was the grass I was playing off of, and wasn't too great. But then we moved up there on the Lee Lewis farm, and when we got the hay out, we took it out of the center. There was about 4 compartments in that barn.
Center chute?
And it was the center where you came up on the ladder to get up in the hay lot. But it was about as wide as this room, and probably longer than from here to that wall, a little longer. And I put a basket up there. I had to wait for the hay to get out of that section before I could play. But then Dad milked cows. I'd bed the shed and throw the hay down and do whatever else he wanted me to do out there. And then I'd go up and I'd shoot baskets. So,
A lot of kids shot in the loft.
yeah, it was all winter, and I had to play against myself. But I always beat the other kid. But basketball became an important thing in my life, and one of the kind of interesting things, I don't remember if Eldred Elkhorn, we had a team in 5th grade or not, or it was 6th grade. I just can't remember for sure when that happened, but he picked the team, and he was calling out the guys from the gym class to be on that team, and he had called them all but me, basically. And he needed one more guy, and Bob Atherton spoke up and said, "You want Jornlin?" So I said, "Okay. Jornlin, come on over here." So that started my basketball career. We had great teams in grade school. I don't think we ever got beat. Eldred Elkhorn was a great coach, a great guy. Everybody would die for that man. But what he would do is we'd get 10 points ahead, maybe in the beginning of the second quarter, and he'd take us out. and you put the second team in. You'd leave the second team in until they got 10 points ahead. And put us back in. And then you only had about a quarter left or less than that. But we always managed to pull it out. So it was the only thing that
Who were some of the guys on your grade school teams?
well, pretty much stayed with me all the way through high school. It was Bill Torman, Howard Seavertrop,
Wow.
Bob Anthony played then, Dean Van Horn, John Gafford.
Scott Atherton, maybe?
Well, Scott was a year ahead of us.
Okay.
Yeah, he played. I think Kay Turnipseed played a little bit, and Bob Larson in those years, but they didn't stay with it in high school. We pretty much, Riley Seavertrop, Torman, and myself, pretty much were the three guys that stayed with it. We either had somebody off the class ahead of us, like the fresh soft team, or we had somebody from the sophomore, somebody off the freshman team. My junior year is probably our best team. I think we won 27 and lost 4. And
This is high school.
high school.
And who was your coach then?
Well, a guy by the name of Harold Bennett came along. We had a guy by the name of
Johnston?
we had Johnson for a year. I think our first, I don't know if I think maybe sophomore year.
I can't remember who was there before him, but
Yeah, because he got promoted. Well, the first guy was Minahan. Like the first coach I had was Minahan, and then D. Jarnett had the varsity, and he left. So I've been my sophomore year, Bennett became the senior coach. And then Johnson was the JV coach. I remember one thing was playing over Mendota, and Mendota was pretty tough most of the time. And we were losing. And he called timeout, called us over there, and he says, "You guys are playing like a bunch of farmers." He says, "You can do better than you're doing." Well, we were all farmers.
yeah.
So that was one of the classic.
Was he kind of tough to play for?
No, not really. No.
He could get about the color of your shirt, I remember.
Yeah, well, Bennett got red.
That's what I meant.
Oh, Bennett, you're talking about Bennett.
Bennett, yeah.
Bennett would get mad.
Yeah, he would.
He cheated me out one time. It took me 2 practices to get over it. But anyway, probably should move along here.
No, I did want to cover that because you had some great teams then. And,
Well, our senior year, both
you
years,
were an excellent player too, what they had.
both years, the junior and senior year, we went down, we won the district and went down to the regional. And we ended up playing Ottawa both times, and we should have beat them both times. That's one of those things I told Bennett. That I said, I played them games over, and I said, we should have beat those guys. Riley says a few games we won, we probably shouldn't have. Did you think about that?
Ottawa was pretty good in those days too.
Well, Ottawa got 3rd in the state my senior year, and we think that was quite an accomplishment. I think we lost by 12 points, but some of that because we fouled in the last quarter.
Mm-hmm.
We had a pretty close game with them. But we played Streeter the night before, and they got a rest. And Streeter was supposed to win the regional, and we beat them by 16 points. So but we didn't have a lot of height. About 6'1", maybe that was stretching maybe. Raleigh was about 6, and we got Chuck Whitaker come down, and he was playing center.
Mm-hmm.
He might have been 6'1", but
Well built.
we had,
Who was the other guard with you?
Sanford, Wayne Sanford.
Okay.
It's my senior year.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, Tufty, Larry Tufty was the guard in my junior year. We had Ross Collins.
Yeah.
Holly and I started, and Wayne Torman was center.
You had a solid team.
We had a really good team. Those guys, Ross Collins and Wayne, were both 6'3". So we had a little height. Not a lot. But, we always beat Serena. Serena had 2 guys, Arnson and Donahue. Or down the hall, I don't know, down the hall.
Yeah, Jerry Donahue, he's dead now.
Yeah, he was.
And Wayne Christopherson?
Was it
Center.
Wayne? Was it Wayne?
I think it's Wayne.
It was Christopherson, there it was Wayne. But Donahue and Arnson wrote up when they were freshmen, and they got a big spiel in the Ottawa paper, and they were good players, all around athletes. We beat them, because they were playing varsity. And Earlville beat them, and then they beat them the next year. And my junior year, we beat them pretty handily both times. But man, their senior year, they're going to be the best team in the world. And they hired a coach, and the way they hired the coach was, they said, "Can you beat Earlville?" We lost a little 10 to them for various reasons, but the finals in the
Tournament?
district, it was in Leland, and I shot with about 2 seconds left on the clock, with 1 point behind. Wayne, that was when we were playing Tormund, excuse me. That was when Tormund, that was a junior year, and it bounced off the rim, and Wayne Tormund got fouled. He shot 2
Wayne
free.
Christopherson fouled him.
Yeah,
He elbowed him. I was there.
Wayne shot free throws underhanded. And put both of them in just as calm as it was.
Didn't even touch the rim.
With senior year, we beat them in our gym. We had the district in our gym. We beat Leland, and the clock stopped about 2 minutes to go. And Norm Wesson will tell you that we didn't start the clock until we got ahead. But we played Leland every Sunday, basically, at our gym, non-sanctioned. But they got to know all our tricks. And Wayne Morrill got tough. He got big and tough. And they had a good team, a good bunch of guys. But yeah, basketball was a big thing. And
how about the teachers there when you were around there? I suppose Margaret Bullock was...
Well, Margaret Bullock was there, and I'm probably one of the few guys that think that she's one of the worst teachers that ever went through Earlville.
No, there's another one in here.
She taught my dad, and she taught my brother. And I've always maintained that she graduated from Earlville. She went a couple of years to college. She came back, and she taught in Earlville. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think one should go to another school and teach and maybe learn some other ways to do things. Mm-hmm. She was big on Shakespeare and some of that stuff, but my English has never been the greatest, and I blame it on her now. Probably not all her fault. But she kind of by how your father did, which is pretty good for me.
That'll get you through, huh?
Yeah, she liked the women better than the guys. And, they probably were better, but not so English. Stuart Montooth was the best teacher I ever had. And he taught me more in FFA than I learned in the rest of the teachers. We had a pretty good science teacher. I can't remember his name, but he was a World War II guy, Navy. Mm-hmm. And he just used to tell us stories. We could get him telling stories. I mean, he'd go through the whole class period. And he always liked talking about the seasickness that were on the ships he was on. But he said, I always ate well because I could see the guy was getting sick, and I'd grab his tray. I thought I wouldn't eat it after that anyway, but he evidently did. We had Mrs. Collins, and Bob Carter was in my class. He became a doctor. And he got up one time and jumped out of that second-story window. Just out of the clear blue. And I thought Mrs. Collins was going to have a heart attack. The buses disappeared one time at school while I was there, and they all went out the marathon. Everybody was late getting to school, trying to rounded up the buses. Didn't do too much damage. I mean, we had...
Did you ever drove a bus before?
I wasn't in on it. Fortunately, I can say that's one time I wasn't in on it. And it's only because I wasn't in town, I had something to do, I don't remember what, I'd have probably been there. Chuck Whitaker, who was president of the student council, and he beat me out. We both run for student council president. And he was a quite popular guy, Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
And I was vice president, promoted to vice president then, but they didn't think they should put the president of the student council, give him any demerits for taking the buses. It's kind of called him in and said, we kind of know you did it, but we can't prove it, but if you tell us you did it, we won't do anything. And so he said, I did it. I think Bob Athen was in on that, maybe Raleigh Sabertine, but never heard all that. Trying to think of other teachers.
Well, you probably didn't have more than 6 or so.
Well, I had, in grade school, going back to grade school, I had a guy by the name of Jolly Roger, I think, Roger Jolly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was afraid of him. He had a big ball of keys that he twirled like this out on the desk and twirled them. And he was, I think, the principal of the grade school.
I believe so, at one point.
I had Mrs. I think Marie Gallagher was our teacher, and Mrs. Richards was there too. And Mrs. Duckles. Mrs. Duckles, we moved over in 8th grade to the high school. And she was up teaching something on the board, and Russell Pratt was saying, "Peep!" And then, of course, he'd turn around and he would be looking at his papers. He did that about 3 times, and she pretended to turn around and turn back. And caught him. She had a ruler, a pretty thick ruler, and a 3-foot yardstick. She come down there and she said, "Russell, hold out your hands." So he held out his hands. She went like that and he pulled them back. She said, "Hold out your hands, Russell." He held them out again. She went, pulled them back. She just took that ruler right over the top of his head and busted it right in half.
That'd be frowned on today.
I tell you what, nobody else said peep the rest of the class, the rest of the time. Harold Bennett got a hold of John Winters one time, and he was messing with Forrest Glover, which he did. He was teaching health. He hated to teach anyway. But they weren't paying attention. He warned him a couple of times, and finally he went down there and he got all of John Winters' chair. It had an arm on it, he sat in it. And he'd give that thing a swing, and it went towards the door, and the door opened, and John went out in the hall and twirled about 3 times right out there in the middle of the hall. Now, nobody acted up in Harold Bennett's class.
I doubt it.
So, but mine too taught me how to weld, taught me how to splice a rope, taught me how to figure rations on a square. He did a lot of work with some of the guys that had trouble with math. And I was pretty good with math. I liked math and didn't have a problem with it. He just a great guy. One of the things he had about a 51 or 52 Ford car, stick shift with overdrive. And we'd go out and visit different not 4-H, but FFA projects, or go out and look at somebody's corn, or go out to Forrest Carter's where we milked cows and talk to him, look at his cows. But on the way back, he would always take it out of overdrive to save his brakes in the stop sign. Very
Conservative.
Conservative type guy.
Well, we don't want to run out of time, but we've got to get on to your career after high school here. It's kind of interesting, I think.
Well, after high school, nobody had been to college in my family, and you know, we just had that 300, or actually, 380 and 240 is what we had at that point. Maybe 320, I can't remember when we got that exactly. But there wasn't any, didn't particularly have a place at the farm, and I wanted to farm. So I said, I think I'll go to college and see what the other 98% of the people do.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a guy out here lived on the curve, Harlow Miller. And he was a big promoter of Monmouth College.
Right.
In fact, I think Earlville had about the third most kids at Monmouth.